a dash of mystery, a sparkle of magic, and all things cozy. Join your host, Elle Hartford, for Cozy Alchemy, a proud member of the Authors on the Air network. Hello and welcome to Cozy Alchemy, the podcast all about magical cozy books. I am here today with Casey Blair, who has a number of series that we're going to get to in just a minute. But first, Casey is going to start us off with a game of Two Truths and a Lie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Casey Blair. I write fantasy books about ambitious women who dare, with lots of banter and adventure. And let's start with my two truths and a lie, see if I can remember them. The first one is I have lived for more than 1 year in a foreign non-English speaking country.
Ooh.
Second one is I live with more cats than I can conveniently count. And the third is I am classically trained in opera.
Ooh, okay. Those are really good ones. I have to ask a clarifying question. What does conveniently count? Does that mean more than fingers, more than toes? But they're all running around?
That means there is not a hard count at any given time.
Fair enough. Let's see. I am, because classically trained in opera too, that takes a lot of time and investment. But I could see how that might go along with living in a foreign country. I am going to guess that... hard left. I'm going to guess that number 3 is the lie, that classically trained in opera.
It is not. That one is true.
Aha!
I did lots of singing and dancing, and opera was one of the things that I spent a lot of time and energy on.
I imagine.
These days I'm not singing opera, but I tap dance and I practice capoeira, which is a Brazilian martial art.
So cool. Okay, which one was the lie?
If you ever need somebody to really blast volume, I'm your girl. I have occasionally used that on my child who's, having a moment and just needs to be kind of overwhelmed with sound for a minute.
I can see how that would be helpful for parenting. Yes. Commanding attention.
It's more like a momentary shock value of cutting through whatever she's gotten hooked on that's gotten her, upset or into a zone or not listening to me, and she kind of goes, oh, okay, reset.
Absolutely. Nice. All right. Okay. Which one was the lie?
The cats, which was true in the past, but is not currently true. During high school, I essentially lived on a feral cat colony, which is to say that a stray mom cat showed up at my house and my mom started feeding it, and then another one showed up and she started feeding it, and they both had kittens, and the problem spiraled out of control before we could find a place that would do trap and release so that we could get them spayed and neutered, but not like a kill shelter. So at some point there was between 30 and 40 cats around my house at a given time, which is why I don't have a hard number. These days I only have 2 cats, which is a much more manageable number. They would still argue that there are not enough pets and strings to go around, but that's cats.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Yes. And the other 30 one that to 40, is true is that I lived in Japan for 2 years.
Nice. I think I remember seeing something on your website about that, so I was like, I feel pretty confident that that's true. Yes, for one reason or another. Was that for school or work related?
That was work, actually. I was teaching English in rural Japan, so off among the rice fields.
Awesome.
And
That's really cool.
A whole different immersive cultural experience, but it's why in my books there are often a lot of Japanese cultural influences.
Well, it makes complete sense. Yeah. Well, and the thing that I immediately thought of as you were talking about this whole different culture is that I think that sort of thing does show up in writing, and it's especially fantasy writing, right? Because you are creating a whole different world that you get to then live in.
Yes.
Yes. So
It's both like world building elements and also just an insight to what it is like to be in a different culture and a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of using language and how that affects how you approach things, and that sort of, and building that in kind of the base level when I'm doing my world building and my character development of how would these people think about whatever it is that I'm doing.
Right. And what are all the little ways to think differently that we just don't even think of, right? Okay. Before this becomes a PSA for the benefits of traveling, let's move into our questions and see how that goes. So, first up, we have one of your best-known series is the Tea Princess Chronicles, right? Which sounds adorable. Can you tell us a little bit about this trilogy?
So Tea Princess Chronicles is about a princess who decides that she can't meaningfully serve her people where she is as part of the royal family. And so when it comes time to dedicate her life in service, she leaves. She essentially disowns herself. She flees to make sure that none of her family can make her undo this choice. And she ends up on the edge of a magical disaster zone where there's a struggling refugee community, there's political machinations brewing, and she's working at a tea shop that serves magical ingredients. And she learns to use both her training as a princess and the tea ceremony itself to build connections that help people, that lift everyone up, building community, and finding ways to bring everybody into a more free world and life. So it's there's magic tea, there's baby dragons, there's found family, and there's a lot about finding who you are and what your path is.
Right, I love that because when you started describing it, the premise has a lot of drama in it, right? A lot of the, the burdens of royalty and crises and on all these things, but then all these. The way you bring in the cozy elements to kind of balance it out and find a new, literally find a new path.
Yes, and there's also a lot about, she has to learn very basic things, like she's never done her own laundry. She's made tea before, but she's never cooked, and so there's lots of cozy elements in her, learning, how to live like a person, both in the very mundane practicalities, but also in what it takes to not live with all of this privilege. And there's freedom in not having all of those strictures on royalty, but there's also a lot more labor and a lot more challenges involved, and she's learning how to negotiate those and how to help people who have those work in their own lives and lift them up.
Absolutely. And probably slowing down quite a bit at the same time, I would imagine. Right? Because you can't just have something done for you immediately. You have to take the time to do it yourself.
Yes. Though there is a lot of her trying to do too many things too fast. She's I have to, redo the inventory at this store, but also there's a gentrification crisis, and also I'm trying to be a good friend, and those things that all of us have to deal with in our daily lives, which is one of the things I think is so powerful about cozy fantasy, is that you can imagine yourself in the daily life of somebody who is trying to have relationships and trying to keep their day job and trying to work on their own art or whatever it is, and how to balance that time, to balance your energy, and to do something to figure out how to be happy with your life and how to find that balance.
100%. Yeah, it's very relatable. Especially not knowing, not knowing when to stop adding things to the to-do list.
Oh yeah, big mood.
I was so fascinated poking around doing my research, realizing that this started as a Kickstarter. What was that whole experience like?
So it actually started as a serial before it was a Kickstarter. I'd written it as a serial. I'd posted it online for free for 4 years. It was a weekly web serial. And then I kept getting questions from people who were like, this sounds great, but I would love to read it in book form. I just don't do serials. So that was what caused me to do the Kickstarter was to, fund like the initial like covers and all of that. So, and it turned out,
sure,
that was kind of the first big thing I'd done. And since it had been free beforehand, I wasn't actually really expecting very much. And then the Kickstarter like totally blew up beyond what I was expecting.
Well, that's amazing. That's great.
Yes,
yeah.
I wasn't prepared. Tea Princess Chronicles is my biggest series so far, and it completely surprised me. So that doing that experience with Kickstarter was also just, it kind of rearranged how I thought about my career. It gave me a lot more agency. It gave me, it told me that this was something that could actually make money.
Fair.
And that the kinds of things that people responded to, that, it doesn't necessarily have to be all like, there's lots of special edition Kickstarters these days, but when I ran that Kickstarter, that wasn't like the done thing yet. This was before Brandon Sanderson's big,
yeah,
huge world-changing Kickstarter. And it still did amazing. People were happy to support, this cozy fantasy, finding yourself story. So it was a lesson in project management. I have worked as a project manager, but the kind of like following up with contractors, keeping track of all the pieces. And I ran this Kickstarter when I was like 6 months pregnant.
Oof. Oh man.
I fulfilled it when I was like a month postpartum. So,
speaking of having too many things on your plate,
people being like, you should add all these things, and I was like, no, I cannot deal with any more complexity than I'm already doing. I have been throwing up every day for 6 months. Like, it's not going to happen. There is no more bandwidth beyond what there is there. But it did make me also want to be like, someday it would be cool if I could add on, those extra things and do more. And I'm starting to finally get to that state. But yes, especially since, I was trying to keep it very manageable then. And so when it like kept getting bigger, and then when I published it and then the series kept getting more and more attention, I was just like, oh, it was delightful, but a surprise.
Right. Well, and there's always room for more to grow or whatever. But so when you started it out as a serial, was it just on your blog, or did you have it like, say, on Wattpad,
I created a separate website
like
for it, teaprincesschronicles.com, which is, technically still up, I think, but doesn't have new content on it, really. I had to take everything down when I put the books into Kindle Unlimited. But, I shared it on a couple of serial websites, and this was also back before Twitter collapsed, so I had enough friends with bigger platforms that that when I launched the Kickstarter, I contacted a bunch of friends and was like, hey, could you spread the news help me spread the news about Kickstarter? And a weird thing I've learned, actually, for any writers who are listening to this, is that people are much happier to spread the word about Kickstarters than they are about new books. Like new retailers. I don't know what that is. I feel like there's some kind of like people want to be part of the group party event phenomenon in a way that they don't necessarily for just a book launch. And since I just ran another Kickstarter that like also I've had just the same experience where people were much happier to spread that word than the actual news of the book. Which is interesting.
That's cool. It makes people feel more like they're helping, I would imagine.
Even if they can't buy the book for, because I'm always happy if people be like, here is my new book post, if you can help spread the word, even if you can't buy it. But people are much happier to do that for Kickstarter than they are for books. I think part of it is, maybe because people then get to like check out cool looking things, even if they can't like, boost it themselves or buy it themselves. But while I was writing the serial, also all of my friends with bigger platforms knew about it, because since it was a weekly serial, I'd been posting every week for 4 years. So,
Yeah.
so it wasn't news to anybody that this series existed and what it was about, and like,
Right.
it was like a really, really long pre-launch marketing period in a way.
Absolutely. I can see
Um,
that. Yeah.
so it didn't actually come from nowhere. Like, I was surprised at the success of the Kickstarter, but that's partially just because I was coming from like a trad pub mindset into an indie pub mindset and not really understanding what was possible. Um,
Oh, yeah. There's something interesting there that I want to get back to. But first, you did mention you have another series that's on Kickstarter now and Patreon too, I believe, right?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it's also serialized.
It is also serialized, and it is also cozy fantasy. Though this one is a much more romance forward. Tea Princess Chronicles does have romance in it, but it's very much, it's more like romantic cozy fantasy than cozy fantasy romance, if that distinction means anything to those listening. There's a romantic subplot. It, continues and grows throughout the series, but it's not like about the romance. Whereas this new one, it's much more romance forward. And the Tea Princess Chronicles also is no spice, and this one very much is spice. So,
Oh, all right.
read whatever your preference is. But
Options. It's good to have options.
yes, so this new one, the first thing I did was a prequel, which is a standalone, which was serialized on Patreon. And then just did the Kickstarter for it, and today the book has actually launched. So it is called The Quiet Side. It is a Sage's Sanctuary standalone cozy fantasy romance. And the next thing I am doing is writing book 1. I have already started writing book 1. I am going to also be serializing that. I will be posting chapters on Patreon starting, I think, next week.
Nice.
And
the serialization, it's something that I have considered in the past. I've done a little bit with short stories that build on each other, but I like to sit down and truly serialize a prequel or a novel. Do you know where you're going ahead of time? Are you literally writing each chapter each week? Okay.
I am writing a chapter each week. I usually try to be writing at least 4 chapters ahead. And
okay.
So when I did Tea Princess Chronicles, I posted a whole chapter at a time. So these days I am not posting a whole chapter at a time. I'm mostly posting like scenes at a time, which is very useful. And sometimes I'll post like multiple in a week because I don't like cliffhangers. I don't like reading them. I don't like writing them. And so if I've
fair
ended on like a good arc, but it's a cliffhanger, I don't want to leave people hanging. That's just like not who I am.
I'm sure it's much appreciated.
So sometimes you'll get, a whole chapter in a week. Sometimes it'll be like half a chapter, but that allows me to not exhaust my buffer as fast, because sometimes, I get sick or I go on vacation or something and I can't literally be writing a chapter every week. And this was something that came up when I was doing Tea Princess Chronicles. The third book, midway, I actually switched to every other week just because I was like, there is too much life happening. I can't keep up with the schedule. And because every time I missed a chapter, I had a policy that I had to write a bonus scene, which is fun. I love doing the bonus scenes. That was actually kind of the reason that I started writing the serial in the beginning, was to give me an excuse to write these little bonus scenes in the tea shop. But it wasn't sustainable, so I eventually changed that. So now I am writing every week. I am writing sequentially. I am writing in order. But I have a very, very extensive outline. My outline for the book that I'm writing now is like 15,000 words. It's very extensive. And I am by nature a discovery writer, which is to say, you sit down and just write whatever comes out. And as the years have gone on, I have increasingly become more and more of an outliner, because when I was discovery writing, I kept like writing myself into holes and being like, wow, that sure is a problem those characters have gotten themselves into. Wonder what's going to happen. Wonder how they get themselves out of it. And then like didn't write for 2 months because I couldn't figure it out until I sat down with like a, kind of outline structure and kind of like reverse engineered what had to happen to get them to the ending. And so eventually I started being like, what if I just started with that? So that I didn't run into a block.
Save some time.
And so and kind of increasingly outlined more and more. And the goal of my outlines, like part of the reason they're so long is because as I'm brainstorming, dialogue will just come to me. So sometimes there's like whole segments that it's more kind of like a zero draft than a real outline. And I can just almost like copy and paste in and add dialogue tags and narration,
Nice.
But the goal of the outline for me is so that I am never at a point while writing where I have to stop and be like, oh no, I have to figure something out. So anything that is easy for me, like dialogue interaction. So sometimes my outlines will say, nonsense like, and then they have a conversation and become friends. And it's like, thanks, past Casey. But that is a thing that I can just improvise on the spot. Whereas like, how they deal with a plot problem, how the world building works, I need to have that figured out in advance or it will totally block me when I'm writing. I'll just, full stop. And the goal of my outline is so that it makes it very easy to get into the flow state so that when I sit down to write, I can just bang out the draft. And it's so fun because I get right into that really fun zone where everything is just creativity happening live.
Nice. I love that. So, even when you're not publishing as you go, that's such a nice, it's a great goal, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it, the reason I'm a writer is because I enjoy it, so it behooves me to make the process, the part that I like actually be the part that I like. If I'm not in this to be a millionaire. If I wanted to be a millionaire, I'd go into finance. Right?
Fair.
So the outline, so I always know where I'm going. I know the arcs. I know how to get there. And I also have at least a very basic idea for series of what happens in the next book. So I know the overarching arcs that I'm working on and a very, one sentence like, in this book, they will be doing this with a tea tournament. In this book, they are going to host a diplomatic summit. So I know what the action of the book is, and I know what the overall arc is so that I can make sure I'm pacing everything right.
Awesome.
So I never get stuck because of this. I've never had a book where I was just like, I don't know, I guess I'll just have to abandon it. That just that's not a thing for me because of how I outline. And it's not, nice. I feel like some people are like, no, I can't outline. Like, this isn't like the kind of outline you learn in school where it's like bullet points and structured. Like, it is just whatever you need to make your life easier.
I love that.
Figuring out the plot in advance makes my life easier. And that means I do all of the hard decisions up front so that when I get to the actual drafting, it's just fun.
That is amazing. And you actually have several other series as well, right? Do you want to kind of like give little overviews? Yeah.
Yes. So I talked about Tea Princess Chronicles. I mentioned that Quiet Side is out today. I also have my other complete series is in the Diamond Universe series. It's Sierra Walker's trilogy, and this one is like urban romantasy, so it's set in our world, and then they also travel to other worlds, but it's very action-packed. It is a heroine who is absolutely not backing down and who knows how much she's capable of and is willing to make it a problem for everyone who is trying to oppress other people.
Good for her.
She has a love interest who is, the shadow-wielding book boyfriend, demon, uber-powerful, ancient immortal, who is at her back. And they have just, like, the best banter, and I love it. So in that book, they're also traveling all over our world and to different worlds, and it's, like, really big, epic magic. battle sequences, but also just like a lot of tender moments because like I love that.
Yeah.
There's a reason I write cozy fantasy.
Right.
So that's that series. The first book is called Take Back Magic. I have the Sundered Realms series, which is a trilogy of interconnected standalones, and the book one is the only one that's out right now. And that is about like an interdimensional combat ambassador who joins forces with the most powerful spellcaster in the world as they're in a world that is separated by that the world has been magically shattered into different pocket dimensions. And so you can only pass through them with portals, and they're traveling around to essentially different discrete dimensions, battling demons and also negotiating politics. And there's a lot of really cool world building in that one, and a lot of another more action-packed one, and a lot of really interesting language stuff. It's a language-based magic system. So that one, and that also has, the partner who sees what you're capable of and wants to do whatever possible to help you achieve your dreams. And my other two books are standalones called The Sorcerer's Transcendent and When Legends Spark, which are they both kind of have like epic plots but cozy vibes.
I'm sensing a theme.
You don't say. Yeah. I may have a brand. They have, these are both like when like two badasses come together to join forces and destroy their enemies together, and also like have a cozy cup of tea at the end of the day, because why choose? So
right.
So there's both of them have like a cozy cottage and all of those vibes, and then also some destroying your enemies to go along with it.
Nice.
So
best of both worlds
at the moment.
That is a lot of fun. And I had on my list to ask you about covers and like how you find cover designers, because your covers are beautiful. Like, again, that's like a theme with all your series and all your books. But also you had mentioned earlier kind of a mindset switch between traditional and indie publishing. So maybe we can roll those two things together. Because with indie publishing comes a lot of responsibility for picking who you work with.
Yeah.
Right?
So, the big mindset shift for me between trad pub and indie pub is just how much more agency I have in my career. And I don't want to say that indie pub is better than trad pub, because they both have their strengths. But for me, trying to break into trad pub was a lot of like, I'd gotten to the point where, I was always getting full requests on manuscripts. I was getting personal feedback from professional editors at big trad houses and big agents, and they would all say, your books are really good, but I don't know what to do with them, but I'm sure somebody else will snap them up, and then nobody was snapping them up.
Right.
So, and then like the next year, something with a similar premise would come out and be a big hit. So I was like, I know that I'm writing commercial. It's just like a timing thing. Which is part of why I had started writing Tea Princess Chronicles in the beginning, because at that point I'd been writing for so long and I wanted something out to show for it, that I was just like, I'm really not just, living in my parents' basement rewriting chapter 1 over and over again. Like, I do know how to write books. I'm writing good books. And when I decided to actually publish Tea Princess Chronicles myself, that was the big shift, and, it started taking off. There was the big shift of not only... I used to think that I needed to launch with trad pub before I did any indie pub in order to, use their marketing dollars and connections to build my base. Right. And starting Tea Princess Chronicles was really a lesson of like, oh, I don't actually need trad pub. And in many cases, I can do this better than trad pub can do. And, if I want to run a sale, if I want to change my metadata, if I need to recover a series, if I want to change my back matter, all of that, like, those are all things I can do. The great strength of indie publishing is that you have so many levers that you can pull. the great danger of indie publishing is that you have so many levers you can pull, right?
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword because, you know, you can, if you do all of the author things, you could do nothing but authoring and not actually write more books, because there's just endless levers that you can pull. And so focus is a big problem. But where this comes into play with covers also is you don't have an art director. If you're big enough, you might be able to afford to hire an art director, but like mostly the best you can do is as an indie pub is to hire a cover designer and cover artist, either or both. But you still have to be doing the art direction.
Right, yeah.
So I can't just go to a cover designer and say, like, I have this book, give me a cover for it. Like, they're not going to read the book. You have to tell them, you know, I want a typography style cover with wintry vibes and this kind of imagery and this kind of font or whatever it is. You have to do your own market research for that. They're not going to do it for you.
Absolutely. I love this. Yeah, because this is a part of it that we don't necessarily always talk about, right? We're like, oh yeah, we're just going to find a cover designer, full stop. Like that solves that problem.
There's plenty of cover designers out there, and there's plenty of cover designers who can do great work, but you still have to give them, and you know, every cover designer is different. Some of them need more hand-holding than others. I prefer to find someone both for art and design whose style I like and whose design I trust, and be like, these are, you know, the core features. Like, I need this book cover to convey magic tea and cozy vibes. However you want to do that. You know, you can do magical steam, you can do tea, like, there can be a cottage in the background. I don't want it to have people on the cover, but the things it needs to do are cozy vibes, magic tea, fantasy font, and that's how A Coup of Tea happened. But it also depends. I have a hard case cover for Sundered Realms, which is very pretty and very fancy, and she needed a lot more details because it was the kind of cover I was asking for has like a bunch of different imagery in it, and so we had to go much more in depth into what kind of imagery from the book would be appropriate for the cover, and what we wanted to highlight, and then how that would work in future covers. So there's a lot of, you have to stay up on trends in your genre, but you have to look like your book belongs in the genre, but is not identical to other books, so that people will be able to identify you, right? So that it will stick in their memory, so that they'll have that visual recognition, which is an interesting line to walk. And, you know, most of us who are writers don't come with this knowledge. You know, this is this is a different skill set, but it is one that you have to develop in some way, unless you are going to pay more money for somebody who will. If you don't develop the skill set, you're probably going to have to be willing to pay a lot more for covers.
Right. Well, it makes complete sense. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. I keep going and going and going.
No, that's you have very good things to say, so that's totally fine. But I suppose
get very inexpensive covers that are really excellent if you can direct them well.
Right. And you still have to have that vision in your head of what you want and how to balance that. You know, the recognizability. For being unique, but also for being within your genre.
And I'm really not visually oriented, but I do have a strong design sense, which helps me. So I am generally happy to be like, these are the elements that we need to hit. Hit them in whatever way you think is best. I have chosen you because I trust your design. And so I try to give my designers much more freedom, and that, you know, the cover I just got for The Quiet Side, like, totally blew me away. It was so much better than I could have imagined myself. And they just completely nailed it from the beginning. Like, it was a pretty cheap cover. So, don't sell yourself short. You don't have to settle for bad covers. Do your research and, really drill down into the elements that it is important for this book to convey what it is. It doesn't also remember that a cover doesn't have to, its job is not to accurately reflect like the content of your book. It is to sell your book to the right readers. So it doesn't matter if like the characters on the cover exactly resemble what they look like in the book. They need to have the right vibe. They have to, or maybe you don't want the characters on the cover. There's various ways to do that, but drilling down into like, oh no, but this specific object isn't in the book, like that's not the point of covers. Covers are a marketing tool. If you want something that accurately reflects the book, commission art. But that's not what the cover is for.
Fair. All right. So getting back to the books themselves, with just the little bit of time we have left, what? No, please. I could have interrupted earlier, and I did not. Okay. What draws you to cozy narratives, and what are you hoping readers will take away from them?
I love this question. What I'm hoping people will take away from them is that it is possible for ordinary people to make extraordinary differences in their own lives and in the world.
Oh, love that.
That is, in my opinion, the escapism promise of cozy fantasy. That it is possible for ordinary people to find a new start, to find happiness, to feel like they matter, and to actually make a difference. And this is why cozy fantasy is so much about found family and community, because it's about healing. It's about, when individual people don't have, epic magical powers, like how do we make a difference on a grand scale? It's by joining forces with other people. It's by working together. It's by recognizing that we're all people and we all have value as the people that we are. Oh, why am I shaking?
I don't know. I couldn't agree with you more, though. Maybe just like passionate.
I have really strong feelings on cozy fantasy. Yeah. Partially because, I hear people who say like cozy fantasy can't have stakes or tension, and like I very much disagree. And oftentimes, if you look at the books that they actually like, they don't follow that.
Right.
They do have stakes. They do have tension. It's that the vibe feels so comforting and so healing that you're not worried about the characters. Like, you believe in them. You're like, that's the escapism promise, is to have that kind of wholesome feeling. But you don't. It lands harder when the character has an actual journey that they have to go on. When there is some sort of character arc, from I need to find my place to I have found happiness from a place. So you're not like dwelling in the darkness. I don't mean that, but like if you don't acknowledge that the darkness exists, the happiness doesn't matter as much. It doesn't feel as important. It doesn't feel 100%. As much like you have earned it.
Absolutely. And like being able to, go through the darkness in the book, or, the stakes and the tension, having the faith that it's going to be okay,
Yes.
Like, especially,
and, when I read an epic fantasy, like, I know that it's probably going to have a happy ending, or a fantasy romance, like, happily ever after is part of the genre premise. But it can be a lot more harrowing, and cozy fantasy is harrowing. It has tension and has stakes, but like, you keep that vibe throughout. And one of the reasons that I like writing cozy fantasy is because, despite the fact that I get a lot of comments about my world building, it's actually like the thing I like writing the least. My favorite thing is the conversations people have when they're like drilling down really intimately and forging really deep connections, and cozy fantasy is just all about that.
100%. Could not agree more. All right. What advice would you give to yourself when you were just starting out?
Whew. You mean starting out writing or publishing?
That is a very good question. I would say starting out publishing, right? Because I feel like writing is something intrinsic that a lot of us just do. But if you,
Yes,
you know, if you had a definite starting point, yeah.
Starting out publishing, the two things you need in order to successfully publish are you need a source of traffic and you need a way to reach your readers. So you don't, I guess the other thing I would say is don't do everything. You cannot do everything. Don't even try and be like, I'll try a few different things and see what works. Like, no, you're going to burn yourself out so fast. Like, do not do everything. You are much better served by going all in on one marketing tactic, learning how to do it really well. And if you spend a bunch of time and it's not working for you, then drop it entirely and pivot to something else. You know, like, Romantasy is very big on Instagram and Book Talk, and like what the strategy you need to do in order to make those work is just not something that's going to work for my brain. But it's like, okay, you know, not that I'm not on social media at all, but like I've talked with Penn Cole, who is like very, very good and was very strategic in how she built her Instagram presence. And I have great admiration for how she did that and how she made it work, but it is not me. It would drive me crazy. And you don't have to drive yourself crazy to be successful. If you're like, you know, the thought of making TikToks fills me with dread, don't do it. Don't do it. You don't have to do things that you hate.
Oh my goodness.
But you have to have a source of traffic and a way to reach your readers. In my opinion, there is nothing better than a newsletter. As soon as you start, even if you don't have anyone, have a newsletter, have a link to it in the back of your book at a bare minimum, and you will gradually start collecting people.
I'm just nodding along. I love my newsletter.
A big kind of, you know, epiphany. I was talking with some friends about increasing, you know, what ways to level up my career from here, and talking with some people who are at a similar income level or higher. And one of the things that they pointed out was one thing that had really worked for me in the beginning was Kickstarter and serialization, and then I stopped doing it. I was, you know, it was like, oh, you know, I had been thinking about that as something to just launch my career and not that I could just like keep doing.
Right.
And so it was like one of, you know, two of my biggest sources of readers I had simply stopped doing. You know, and it was just kind of this like head desk, like, you know, light bulb, like, oh, obviously, classic Jorts, good work, past Casey. And so bringing that back, you know, this launch for a new cozy fantasy novella that has no bells and whistles has already been bigger than my last several book launches.
Wow.
Because I did serialization and I did Kickstarter. You know, I went back to the things that do work for me. You know, I still needed that traffic source, and I hadn't been able, you know, since I had stopped doing that, I had no way that I was pulling new readers to me since I wasn't going, you know, I wasn't doing social media. And there's lots of different ways that you can generate traffic to your book pages or to your newsletter, but you do have to have one. You do have to have one, and you have to have a way to tell them that the new books are out.
Yes.
So my advice for people who are starting with indie publishing is to explore what the options are for set up a newsletter and explore what the options are for finding readers in your genre, or just what works for your brain, and pick one. You have to have a traffic source or you will not find readers. That's the big, like, very basic thing that escapes a lot of people who are like, I'm posting on social media, but nobody's finding me. And it's like, what is your actual strategy?
Right.
The more high level and intentional you can be about it, the more it is likely to work for you. And the less likely you are to burn yourself out, because you'll have a strategy that you're working on. And so you'll be able to judge when things are just distractions. Don't just throw spaghetti at the wall. Choose something on purpose and execute that.
I love that we started out by talking about a character who feels like she needs to do everything, and have come all the way around to don't do everything. Actually, that's not a good plan. Just an observation.
Yeah. So, any fellow millennials listening to this,
I totally get it.
You don't have to burn yourself out. It truly is not required. And it will actually work better for you if you are not doing all the things. And this is something I have to remind myself periodically as I, months pass, and I'll be like, oh, I can just add in one more little thing. That won't take much more time. And then there's 100 of them, and it takes all my time. The most important thing also is writing your book. If your authoring time is taking more time than your writing time, revisit that. Just reconsider. and as a chronically millennial, everything side gig, do all of the things overachiever, I'm sure there's probably some of you listening to this, and I feel you, and so you may have to do this more than once. But focus is going to get you a lot farther.
Ooh, yes. Oh my goodness. Advice I also need to hear all the time.
Really, this is an attack on all of us.
So thank you. Yeah, we're all in the same boat. It's okay. We'll get through it. That's the promise of cozy.
Yes.
All right. But to end on a cozy, positive note, what's one big win you've had this week? Big or small, actually?
This week?
Anything.
Oh man, this is one of those times.
I know we're early in the week,
at the same time that I'm like, what has even happened in the last week? I mean, my book just came out. That's a big win.
That's a pretty big win. Yep.
It's yeah, and it's going great. So honestly, that's the thing I'm super excited about right now, is that I have I'm launching a new world, and people seem excited about it, and that that never gets old. And it never stops feeling like a relief, and just really heartwarming and exciting that people are excited to read something that I wrote. And, even though, as I said, I don't do social media, I haven't even caught up with all of the social media today, because for whatever reason, probably because I actually had a traffic source.
Yeah.
People are really excited about it. And so it's going further, even though, social media is not my core strategy. It's still billowing. And so it's really exciting to just see all of the love and excitement that this new tiny little novella that's a standalone is getting, and this Kickstarter also nearly doubled my original Tea Princess Chronicles Kickstarter that was for 3 complete full-length books, and it's a tiny little novella. So
that's progress.
Also, that tangible, people do still want to read my books. My career is growing. There are more readers out there, and I'm reaching them, and kind of seeing that in real time is just really validating. And so there is my cozy note for you.
There we go.
Keep doing what you love, and keep working at it, and you'll find your avenue. You'll find your path.
Yay! That is absolutely perfect. So on that note, I think we're gonna end. I will have all of your links and everything in the show notes, so people will be able to find you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, I kept rambling.
No worries
so
at
nice
all.
Me all the time.
No worries. It's good, useful rambling. That's what we're here for. And on that note, listeners, I will talk to you next time. Cozy Alchemy is brought to you by Authors on the Air, and our theme music is by Cyberwave Orchestra. For everything else, blame Elle. You can find her online at ellehartford.com.